Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Carmen Mazzara, and I serve as Executive Director of APSIA, the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs. As you know well, we are the community of graduate schools worldwide that specialize in the teaching of international affairs and policy and all the wonderful issues under those umbrellas. We're also very proud to be the home of the Public and International Service Advisor Network, your community of undergraduate and community college advisors across the United States who really are advancing and championing issues of public and international service on your campus. As part of our ongoing webinar series, we are so glad to welcome back the Paul Daisy Soros Fellowship for New Americans. And they're going to be sharing with you the tremendous opportunity that they provide to help your students who are immigrants or the children of immigrants access graduate study. As we go through, if you have any technical issues, please feel free to reach out to my amazing colleague who made this webinar happen, Brittany Chor. And if you have any questions for our speakers, feel free to put those in the chat or to send them directly to me. And after the conversation and presentation, we'll be able to help you get all the information that you need to bring back to your students. As you know well, this session is part of that series that we have each and every month for you. So please don't forget to join us in our next month fellowship, the one after that. And all of the recordings are always available at the APSIA YouTube page, which I will share in the chat in a minute. So if you need to revisit this content or share it with others, it is here as a resource for you. And so with that, I'm going to stop talking because there's much more important information for us to get to. And I'll turn the floor over to Craig Harwood to get us started. Craig.
Thank you so much, and we're absolutely delighted to be here today, and we're looking forward to this presentation, which we're gearing specifically towards the APSIA community. I'm Craig Harwood, the director of the fellowships, and Nika Landau, our communications director, is also with us, and together we'll be sharing information. Use the chat to ask questions, and then we'll do some time for Q&A at the end, so you'll have multiple ways to ask questions. All right, we're going to go over the background of the fellowship, what the fellowship covers, who we're looking for, our eligibility, our selection process, the application itself, and we'll let you know how students can get started with an application.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. We just put in the chat, if you can share your university or program that you're with, that would be great, just so we have a sense of who's in the room. Thank you all for joining us, and thanks so much to Carmen and Brittany for making this possible. We really appreciate it. So our fellowship is 1 to 2 years of funding. This is sort of the snapshot version. We'll go into details. It's up to $90,000 in stipend and tuition support over those 1 to 2 years. The students don't need to reapply in between or for the 2 years. They just apply once. And then we build community through our fall conference, which fellows are required to go to for 2 years, their first year as a fellow and their second year. Our fellowship director, also Craig, will visit each fellow on their campus. And we now have 805 fellows. We've been around for 26 years and built that network over time. We have fellows in all different fields, but we do have a number of folks who have focused on MPAs or MIAs and similar degrees in public affairs. The fellowship was started by Paul and Daisy Soros, and what's super special about our fellowship, I think, is that our founder, Daisy Soros, is still actively involved. So Craig's always on the phone with Daisy. She's 94, and she's a Hungarian immigrant, and she is so active. It is truly amazing, and it's just really special to have a founder of a program who represents the identity of the people that they are actually supporting. And so the fellowship is really made out of the story that her and Paul had coming to the US from Hungary. Paul was able to get onto the Olympic ski team in Hungary after living under communism and Nazism. And that is how he got a visa and decided to defect and eventually made it to America. And, you know, he just always thought back to going to school here and having so little money, and having to make all of his choices based on money. So in the late 1990s, when they were thinking about how to give back, they came up with this idea of this fellowship that would be just for immigrants and children of immigrants, to really showcase all of the great ways that new Americans are giving back and contributing to the country. And I think we can probably all agree that we have enough conversation about that negatively portray immigrants in this country, and yet there's so much good and so much positivity. So that really is what this fellowship is focusing on. We select 30 fellows who are going on to make distinctive contributions to American culture or their field. So some of our fellows are really working at the highest levels of government, and I would say very traditional leaders, the type of person you might see with a megaphone. And some of our fellows are leaders in a very different way. They might be quietly working at a research bench. And we are very excited about all of those different types of contributions, and how they can impact our society and America. So the fellowship is $90,000, and most people apply for that. And the goal of the $90,000 is to really help students unlock their potential a little bit faster. I think we all know that graduate school is way too expensive and for everyone. And oftentimes students are essentially making a series of calculations about what jobs they need to take in order to make their degree possible. And instead of thinking about how they might be making an impact sooner, they're thinking about paying back their graduate school loans and things like that. So our fellowship is more focused on allowing students to take risks and to get to the point faster. Take that unpaid internship that might be unfair that it's unpaid, but it's still great. And explore the big questions a little bit, unburdened. And at the same time, the fellowship is there to connect students with this incredible peer group of people who are also asking big questions. And it's amazing to see our students who are from all different fields and all different immigrant backgrounds really connecting, because so many of them are really interested in the same overall big questions. So I wanted to just share a little bit about some of our fellows that are in this space. And so, I think the important thing is you'll see that fellows are coming from, I'll share fellows from different class years. So for example, Carla's a 2001 fellow, and she got her bachelor's from Loyola University and her MPA from UT Austin, and she's in policy now in North Carolina. Kevin Nazimi is a 2005 fellow who got his MBA, MPA from Harvard, and he co-founded Oscar, the health insurance company, and Renew.com. Ankur Shah is a 2005 fellow and was focusing on architecture actually, and then made the switch to get his MPA. He was the chief development and finance officer at Careem, which is an e-hailing company in the Middle East, and then went on to We, which is a grocery business. Kat Trushalo, is a 2015 fellow, and she was a Mitchell Scholar and then got her MA from Tufts Fletcher School. And this is actually out of date. She's left the Libraries Without Borders, but she's working in the nonprofit space in DC. Elliot is a 2021 fellow, so much more recent, and he was a Schwartzman Scholar and then pursued his PhD at Princeton and is graduating. And then our 2024 fellow, Kirthana, she got her bachelor's from the University of Illinois and went on to be a public school teacher in DC for several years. And she's now pursuing her MBA and MPP at the University of Chicago. So these are just a few examples of folks who are in the field to give you a sense of who's in the group. But we also, of course, have a much wider group of fellows who are also interested in policy. So Nadine Burke-Harris is our first, was the first Surgeon General of the state of California. Vivek Murthy is the U.S. Surgeon General. And Fei-Fei Li is one of the sort of founding mothers of AI, is the co-director of the Stanford Human-Centered AI Institute. And so she has been on Capitol Hill a lot and just written a book and is very interested in AI policy. Guillermo Meyer is the president and CEO at a civil rights law firm in San Francisco. So again, not directly involved with policy, coming from this more of a law background, but very, very interested in the field. All right, Craig, do you want to talk a little bit about the fellowship?
Sure. Thanks. So we provide up to 2 years of support for graduate study, any field, any advanced degree granting program in the United States. The total in funding that we provide is as much as $90,000. That's split over 2 years. It's $25,000 a year in stipend support and $20,000 a year in tuition support. So ultimately $45,000 a year times 2. We keep mentioning that, at the heart of the fellowship really is the fellowship community, and we work to build that in a number of ways, but the signature program is our fall conference. And in the first 2 years, when you're considered to be an active fellow, you are brought into our fall conference. It's typically in New York City, and it's a weekend of opportunities to explore your new American identity, to meet the other members of your cohort, and to really get a chance to bond with this new community. It's a really spectacular opportunity. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about eligibility, and I will say this is where we get in the weeds. We get questions about this all the time. Don't hesitate to reach out to us at a later date as you're working with a student who has a very specific eligibility question that you're not able to figure out. We field questions on eligibility all the time. And of course, the reason we get so many questions is because, one, the rules are a little complicated, but more than that, there are so many different situations that someone might be in terms of their new American status in particular. Also, you'll see with the academic standing, which I'll talk about in a moment as well, there's many different possibilities of where you could be in your academic trajectory. And so because of that, where somebody is and in conjunction with our rules can be somewhat complicated, and we understand that. So in terms of eligibility, there's 3 buckets that you need to be thinking about. One is the new American status. Do you fit our definition of a new American? Then the second is academic standing. Where exactly are you in your academic trajectory? And the third is age, and that one's very straightforward. So let me start with new American status, which is the most complicated. And this itself breaks into two big categories. One is if you were born abroad versus if you were born in the United States. So I'll start with if you were born abroad. So if you were born abroad as a non-US citizen, one of the following must be true. And I want to emphasize one of the following. It doesn't have to be all of the following. Okay, you must be naturalized, or be a green card holder, or be adopted to the US, or have refugee or asylee status. Or if none of the above fit your situation, you would be eligible if you've graduated from both high school and college in the United States, and this includes DACA recipients. Okay, so that's the first half of the new American status. Let's go to the next slide. So the second part is if you were born in the United States. So here's what we would need to be the case for you to be eligible if you were born in the US. Both of your parents must have been born abroad as non-US citizens. Okay, that's the general rule. So this one's a little bit more straightforward. We do understand that some individuals were raised in single parent households. In order for us to just consider the eligibility based on that one parent who raised you, the parent who raised you must have been born abroad as a non-US citizen, and your second birth parent was not part of your life growing up, and you have no contact with them. Okay, let's go on to the second big bucket for eligibility, and this is academic standing. To be eligible, you must be entering graduate school or in the first 2 years of graduate school as of the application deadline. In addition, applicants must be planning to be enrolled in an eligible full-time graduate program for the full 25-26 academic year. And there is no way to defer the first year of the fellowship. So you have to be entering in this case, assuming people are applying this coming up October. I'm not sure we told you our application deadline yet, but we will make sure to do that. But if you're planning on applying sort of this year, which really means this coming fall, you would need to be enrolled the following full year at the very least for graduate school. So that would be the 25-26 academic school year. There are a number of different, okay, now I'm really getting into the weeds. What I already said is the basic information for academic standing, but just to even add a little bit more clarity and nuance, there's a number of different places where you might be in your academic trajectory at the time you're applying. Okay, and so I will now state that the application deadline is October 31st, 2024. It's 2 p.m. Eastern time. Your academic standing is determined by what your academic standing would be on that date. Okay, so maybe you're entering graduate school for the following year, which means that at the time you're applying, you're a college senior. That's very common. Or you might be a college graduate at the time of the application deadline next fall. Maybe you're out working for a year or two, or you're doing some lab work, or you're taking a couple of years to get some job experience before you go to graduate school. That's all fine. That's all very common. It's also possible that as of next fall, you'll be in graduate school. Also very common for people in our program to be, who are applying, to be already in graduate school. If you're currently in graduate school, you must not have begun the third year in that program as of next fall when you apply. Okay, again, it's all very confusing because we're in spring before the spring before the application deadline. We have a number of people who apply in joint degree programs. You must not have begun the third year of the degree program that you want funding for in 25-26 as of that application deadline, okay, as of next fall. There are a few ineligible programs, so I'll just quickly go through those. These programs would not be eligible for the fellowship: executive graduate programs, joint bachelor's, master's programs. So those are ones where the 2 degrees are awarded at the same time, like at the end of both. At the end of your master's degree, you get both your master's and your bachelor's. Certificate programs, post-bac programs, graduate programs that are not in the United States, graduate programs that are not fully accredited. Okay, those are programs that would not qualify for the fellowship. And I said the last requirement is the most straightforward: eligibility by age. You cannot have reached or passed your 31st birthday as of the deadlines. You must be 30 or younger as of our October 31st deadline. We do not make exceptions to that rule. We're looking for individuals who've demonstrated creativity, originality, and initiative. And we really look deeply for these wherever they are in your application. For some people, that will be in a project they did in school. For someone else, that will be in a way that they've demonstrated support for their home community. But we really do believe that, we're looking for people who bring a spark of creativity, particularly in the way they're going to approach their academic work and let's say their public policy. Is it, how they're taking a new and creative approach to some social problem, or they have a fresh idea for how you might be understanding some policy issues. That would probably be the kinds of things we would be hoping for people who are applying, although we do understand some people might be very young. They might be in college still as they're applying for both us and a public policy program. So we do understand that people are at different places in their trajectory, and we take that into account. We're looking for sustained accomplishment, people who have achieved at a high level for a number of years, and that's largely because we're looking for people who hold the promise of making future significant contributions to society. And since we don't know exactly what you're going to be doing in the future, we use those past accomplishments as our indicator of what we think is likely to be your level of accomplishment in the future. We value planned graduate training that's relevant to your goals. And we value a commitment to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. I'll just clarify, we're not looking for people who write essays on the Bill of Rights, the Constitution. We're looking for people who have demonstrated through their lived experience and appreciation for the values of democracy. How are you living in our society in a way that demonstrates your appreciation for living in a meritocracy, in a country that values the rule of law? How do you demonstrate the appreciation you have for citizenship? I don't mean U.S. citizenship, but citizenship in any community in which you reside, your cultural community, your home community, your academic community, other communities that you support. These are some of the ways that people express their appreciation and commitment to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights without writing an essay or ever mentioning either of those terms. In our selection process, we do our best to create a level playing field. We do this by taking each applicant on their own terms. We don't start out by comparing applicants and trying to figure out, who's stronger in this versus who's stronger. We just look at you and your application and thoroughly assess your own accomplishment based on the access to resources that you had, based on your own immigration trajectory, based on just your own background. And that's the way that we try to take each person on their own terms. We are merit-based, and what that means is that we're looking for 30 remarkable individuals who are have that potential to achieve at a very high level. We're not financial need-based, although our fellows certainly appreciate the funding. Some of them need it. Some of them may have other sources of funding and need it less. Nonetheless, we don't take your need into account when we're assessing applications. We don't have quotas. We're not looking for any particular number of fellows from any particular degree area or any heritage. All applications are reviewed after the deadline. We don't do rolling admissions. So there's no advantage. In fact, there's a disadvantage to getting your application in tomorrow, let's say, because our application isn't due until next October, and there may be experiences that happen between now and October that you want to write about. So we encourage you to get your application in a week or two early, just to make sure that you're not stressing out and last minute trying to put things together. We do a holistic review. I've already mentioned that, but that also goes on to your the requirements for things like GPAs and test scores. We don't have specific cutoffs or expectations. We take everyone on their own terms. Some people have outstanding grades, outstanding test scores. Other people, maybe there was something that got in the way of their doing great on a test, and we're going to look at you and find your strengths in the application wherever they lie. For some of you, that may be in your tests and your scores, but for others, there's other places where you're really going to shine, and we're going to focus on those. For the application itself, you can log on to our website at pdsoros.org, and you can start an application. It begins with a series of questions, demographic questions, educational background questions. We ask you to upload a resume or CV, transcripts from all of your past college and graduate school experiences, test scores. These are test scores that the graduate program you're in or are applying to require. If they require them, we require them. But if they don't require any test scores, we don't require them. Whatever the graduate school wants is what we'd like to see. 2 essays and optional exhibits. So for the essays, this is, I think people often think of this as sort of the central part of the application. And the first essay is about your new American experience. And maybe that's why, because it's so focused on our mission. The essay asks you to reflect on how being a new American has shaped your worldview and your perspective and what you want to do, shaped your goals. The second essay talks about your graduate school choice and how it's going to help you achieve your goals, why that graduate program makes the most sense. I would say that essay looks a little bit more like the kind of essay you submit with your graduate school application. But of course, depending on where you are, I mean, if you're in college applying to graduate school, it might be very similar. If you've already been in graduate school for a year, perhaps your goals have changed, and there's some, there's things that you would want to change about that. And of course, I'm not telling you have to use that essay. I'm simply saying that it tends to be a similar kind of question that gets at similar types of responses. The optional exhibits are a place on our application where you can upload up to 5 additional documents. Maybe we'll see some writing sample. If you've published a co-authored paper, a policy paper, you may want to include that. Some people will just, if it's published, they might just include an abstract. Some people will include the whole paper. It's really up to you. Maybe you won an award and there's a certificate with a citation you'd like to include. Sometimes people use it to show the breadth of their interests. Perhaps while you're studying public policy, you're also a wonderful poet and you want to include an example of your poetry, or perhaps you paint and you want to give us an example. By no means are we expecting this, like this is not like, oh, wow, I better figure out what my hobby is that I can include in this optional exhibit. It's not like that. They are optional. And very recently, we did an info session where some fellows were on, and I asked one of the fellows to share with the audience, what her optional exhibits were. And she said, actually, they were optional. I didn't include anything. And she still won. So, this is not a required section. It is optional. If you feel that it's going to help round out your application, then you should take advantage of it. We require 3 letters of recommendation, but accept up to 5. We have people win with 3 letters, with 4 letters, with 5 letters. So it really is up to you how many you submit. As I always say to students when they're in the room, 3 strong letters is way better than 3 strong letters and one weak letter. So make sure that when you're working with students, you let them know that don't try to go for quantity, go for quality. Nika, why don't you take it back?
Sure. So thanks, Craig. So we have some great resources online. If you have a student who's interested, I think pointing them to our website is great. We have webinars like this available that are recorded, and we actually have them by field. So that students can hear from people in their field. And then there's also like an eligibility presentation that they can listen to. But we also have a few articles about essays and recommendations so that they can look those over. The other thing is that our website can be really intimidating for students. Part of our mission is that we are trying to promote immigrants. And so some of our audience, we really are not trying to be shy about how amazing our fellows are. But we realize that for students who are looking to apply, this can really cause a lot of sort of imposter syndrome, or whatever you would like to call it. And so we know that it can be difficult for fellows or for applicants to see themselves in the fellows. But if you're ever talking to students, first, I think the important thing to say is that applying is, not just an exercise to get the fellowship. Applying is part of the exercise, is improving yourself. These essays are meant to be thoughtful and thought-provoking and to connect our applicants with their new American experience. but also for our applicants to reflect on what they want to do and to hopefully motivate them to challenge themselves and focus on graduate school or achieve at an even higher level. No matter what, we want that application process to be helpful. But also just it's important to remind the applicants that all of our fellows felt the same way when they were applying. So no one, we'll talk to a student who's like at Harvard Law and has 3 Harvard degrees, and they're like, I just don't think I can get this fellowship. So, there's no one is going into this with confidence. And Craig always says, you have 100% chance of not getting it if you don't apply. So that's the only way you can guarantee you won't get it. So we really are excited about the process, and we love seeing our applicants just reaching out to mentors to get 3 recommendations. That's something they're going to have to do no matter what. And, this is a great exercise in helping them to do that. But the other thing is that we have, I'd say, a really good setup on social media, and that if your students are on Instagram, that's a great way to see us with our hair down a little bit. And I would recommend that. The fellows take over the Instagram for a week at a time. So we'll start doing that in June, since we just announced our new class in April. And it's just a nice way for, I think, people to remember these are in fact just graduate school students like the rest of us, who are fairly goofy and have, great stories to tell, and are not, some other type of human superhero. They're just normal kids. So I always encourage people to check them out on Instagram. And I think it genuinely helps people to learn, just to hear what they're saying and talking about, and how they describe their immigrant stories. Just helps students get a little bit more comfortable with the world that we're operating in, which might not, be everybody else's everyday world. And then, for students, these are kind of the next steps that we're always recommending. We don't require a university nomination, but we always are encouraging our applicants to reach out to their universities for any type of help and support. And then our office is, always open and available for folks to be in touch. Yeah, so with that, I think that's all Craig and I had that was strictly prepared. We're again so excited to talk with you all. And we were just talking with our board about applicants that they really want to see more of, and they're saying we want more students in public policy. And so this is really a group that we're excited about. This is obviously such an important field. And so I'm just excited to, be able to, we've been doing this now for a few years, but it's great to be with you all. And I hope that, we really, that we really see you as just this great way to connect with students. So especially for those of you who are at schools where we've never had a fellow, we would love to see applicants from your school. And, Craig and I are always happy to be in touch if you have questions and things like that.
Thank you both. Go ahead, Craig. Yeah.
Oh, no, I was going to start to answer some of the questions, but please.
So to summarize a little bit, I have one set of questions that's more about the logistics of things, and then some questions that are more about the deeper meanings of things. And I invite our attendees, again, feel free to send me a direct message or to put them publicly in the chat. One that Nika already answered in the chat, but I want to make sure folks who are listening to the recording can hear, is do transcripts have to be official transcripts, or can they be unofficial transcripts?
And they can be unofficial. So so we don't take anything by mail. And so if students can send us their transcripts however they can, that's great. And a lot of folks who are applying in their first year of graduate school also have sort of empty transcripts. We still want to see a blank transcript because it tells us you're in fact enrolled in the school that you say you're enrolled in. But especially because they might not have recommendations from that graduate program yet. But yes, we're looking for an unofficial transcript at that point.
And then for students who are in the process of applying but haven't done their standardized tests yet, will not having those scores hurt their application, or how might that be considered?
So Craig, you welcome to this, but I mean, what I would just say is the scores, we work with so many different types of students. And so there, especially post-COVID, there's the changes of requirements on scores has really changed. So I would say that our readers are pretty special, like they know a lot about graduate school and they're also reading hundreds of these applications. So they sort of have a good sense of test scores. I would say that we're, happy to have the test score. It is helpful to us. But we by no means expect everyone to have their test scores by that point. We totally understand that many people don't have their test scores at that point. We just, if you have it, please send it is kind of the attitude. And then we, as Craig said, we don't have any hard cutoffs on scores and GPAs. So I also would just recommend not advising students based on those factors, because our team of readers are well trained to know that these scores are not everything in an application process, both for us and for the universities that the students might be applying to. Craig, is there anything you'd add on that?
Yeah, I'll just say there's actually a check box, have you
Yes.
taken your test yet, or not, or, have you received your score? So it's very common for us. And then if somebody makes it to the finalist stage, which you really didn't talk about, but then you would be invited in for an interview. We give you an opportunity to update your materials and add additional materials. So at that point, it's quite likely that you would have the test score. It's not 100%, but it's pretty likely that by then, which is like mid-January, you'll have those materials and you can update your application with that.
That's great. Thank you. A couple more nuts and bolts questions. Craig, you mentioned a resume or a CV. Is one or the other preferred? Is it driven by discipline? What level a student is? Most students don't even know the difference, but in general, what should advisors recommend students submit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of driven by the factors you mentioned. It's driven by discipline and how far out of school you are. But in general, I would say I tend to see the 2-page resume as the most common. But we do have some people who are a little further along, and they have, a number of publications, and they've done some teaching, and they have, some presentations, and then you start to get these longer CVs, and it's okay.
Thank you. On the letters of recommendation, is there instructions or guidance about academic, professional, community, civic? Do you not care? What makes a strong type of recommender, and do you prescribe that?
I think that, if there's somebody who speaks to your potential within your field and also, your potential in your academic program, those are always really helpful. But we do see a really wide range, and it's because, you see so many people who are at different stages in their career, and especially in public policy, like it's very likely that someone's been out of school for a couple years, and their recommendations wouldn't necessarily be coming from like either undergraduate or graduate school professors. So then it's been a mentor who's worked with them in the workplace in some kind of an area. But I would say, like, my general approach, and I'm guessing this is sort of how you advise, is less thinking about the specifics of who that person is, rather think about what they're going to say about you, and in conjunction with at least the other 2 letters. And what I mean by that specifically is, like, are you going to get a 3-dimensional picture of this applicant by the collection of letters that you're selecting? So when we, as a team of screeners or interviewers, sees those letters, do we have a really rich and robust set of recommendations that really, again, paints a kind of a full picture of who that applicant is, as opposed to 3 letters all from the same job, all from the had worked on the same projects with that person, and they all speak about exactly the same thing. Sometimes it happens. I mean, what are you going to do if that's all you have? Then and somebody could still win like that. But I'm just saying, ideally, I think your setup is, people who know that applicant from different perspectives.
That's similar advice to what we always give about grad school too. That makes total
Absolutely.
sense.
Absolutely. That makes sense. Exactly.
Moving a little away from kind of the nuts and bolts, are you able to give us again a little more sense about timeline? When are the fellows typically named? And then as a complement to that, who is usually part of the review process, and how does that go on? Obviously we would love their name and email and phone number and credit card, but if you don't mind just sharing a little bit about who typically does that part of the process and when information is shared.
Absolutely. How about Nika? Why don't you do timeline, and then I'll go into the screening process.
Yeah, sure thing. So timeline, we just announced our 2024 fellows in April, and they'll actually start receiving funding this fall. So and we launched our application for the 2025 fellowship. So let's break that down a little. So this fall, our application is due, and it's due in late October, on October 31st. And if you're applying in the fall, then you would hear from us right in early January of 2025. That's when we tell folks you're either a finalist or not. And if you're a finalist, you're one of 77 finalists. And we will then interview all of the finalists in late January and early February of 2025. Those interviews are virtual interviews, and they're done with a panel of people. Then in March of 2025, we'd share with the finalists whether they actually got the fellowship or not. And then in April, we would make that information public. And then the fellowship would begin, the funding part of it would begin in the fall of 2025. So really, so if you're advising anybody who is applying to graduate school this fall, even if they don't know where they're going, they can apply to our fellowship. And if you're working with anybody who's in their first or second year of a program this fall that they're seeking funding for the next year. So you still, if you're done your graduate program in the spring of 2025, or in the spring of 2025, then you can't apply for our fellowship because the funding starts in the fall of 2025 in this next round.
Thanks, Nika. And so, yeah, let me address the question of like who is seeing the application and how does that process work? And I'm glad you asked the question, because I think it's really helpful, especially for you as advisors, to get a little bit of a sense. So in the first rounds, when we're just reading applications, this is not interviews and finalists. This is just, we get 2,000 applications. We have a team of screeners, and they screen in multiple rounds, depending on how strong the application is. And those screeners, I would say they're all really smart people with graduate degrees who are very familiar with high achieving students and fellowships, things like that. They are all an expert in something, but they're not assigned to be an expert in that thing for this process. They are meant to be the holistic readers. And so in the initial screening phases, it's quite likely that it's not necessarily going to be somebody in your field that reads it, but it might be. I mean, again, they're smart people, they're in different fields. I mean, it's certainly possible that someone in your field, but that's not the goal. The goal is to have somebody, a generalist who's very familiar with lots and lots of applicants, because they read tons of applications, will be reading your application. That being said, this doesn't necessarily apply so much to this group, but I want to be fair and just make sure I've said it. If you have a highly technical application, we may also send your application off to a specialist in that field just for feedback on your work within that field. They're not meant to give the holistic read. They're meant to just give an assessment of your academic work in a way that only a specialist could really understand. And then they send it back to the generalist screeners for the overall screening. Okay, so that's how we get through that round. So Is there a possibility that someone who's very familiar with your field will see your application? Yes. Is it definite? No. Let me go on to the finalist phase for you, just so you have a sense of how that is, and then I'll come make a couple comments of what I think this means. Okay, so then if you are selected to be a finalist, each finalist gets 2 interviews. They're about 25 minutes long, and they're with a panel of interviewers. And that panel consists of experts in a variety of fields. Some are past fellows from earlier years. Some are just professionals and academics and people out there in the working world. And those folks will do the 2 sets of interviews, different panel for each interview. So in the room, there will very likely be someone who's very familiar with your field. It's not 100% of the time, but it's quite likely that someone familiar with your field will be on one of those panels. Okay, so now let me rewind and say, what does this all add up to? What I think it adds up to is that a good application can both convince people who are not in your field that the work you're doing is really important, but could be read by a specialist and would also convince them that you're working at a very high level and you're very familiar with the field and you have great potential within the field. And I think that's a challenge because certain fellowships are so focused on one field of study that they're only read by specialists in that field. Other kinds of fellowships are just so general that they don't ever worry about the specialist kind of thing. But because of who we are, we kind of get both. Like we're looking for people who are well-rounded. We're looking for people who are able to talk to folks outside of their field. But we ultimately want people who are also going to achieve at a very high level within their field. And so people will be weighing in on that conversation. So that's the challenge, I think, for our application is how do you bring people along who are outside of the field, but also speak to those specialists within your field.
That's a great help. And I have a couple more questions that are a bit deeper. So I want to do really quickly the last bit of nuts and bolts. Can the fellowship be used with other types of other types of funding? Can the fellowship be used for lots of different kinds of degrees, master's and PhD? And are there any restrictions on who can apply if they're already employed, if they're graduate students? And if we can bundle those 3 together quickly, that we can get to some of the ones that I know are going to require a lot richer conversation.
Okay, wait, so I'm going to bundle them, but you got to remind me. The first one is...
Can it be used with other types of funding?
Yes, okay, absolutely. It can be used with other types of funding. We don't have limitations on how many different sources of funding, although ultimately there are some caps on, like you can't be getting more than full tuition. And I will also be honest, sometimes other funders pull back when we provide our funding, particularly graduate school funding will say, oh, well, now you have that $20,000 from PD Soros. We don't need to provide ours. And we try to avoid that, but it's a little bit out of our hands. In any case, though, I think the main point is it is fine to have multiple sources of funding. Next question was... Can
it be used for any kind of accredited degree, master's, PhD, et cetera?
Yes, any degree granting program in the United States that's accredited, yes. We have a wide variety of degrees that people have been funded for.
And are there restrictions on who can participate if you're already employed, if you're already a graduate student, any of those kind of things?
Right. Well, in terms of already being a graduate student, you have to be in your first or second year when you apply. If you're beyond that, then it's too late. But that's sort of more an eligibility issue. But that's the short answer to that. You cannot be working full-time, however. So it can't be a part-time program. You have to be full-time in our program. And that kind of implies that you can't be working full-time. We do have some ruling that I can't remember honestly about how many hours you can work a week, and so people hold part-time jobs, and also we understand that like graduate student teaching is part of your degree, so we're understanding of that kind of stuff. But you can if you're doing this part-time, if you're doing graduate school part-time or you're trying to work full-time while you're doing those 2 things would not work with us.
Gotcha. So now to get into some of the thornier, more nuanced issues. Craig, you talked about how the applications are assessed based with a lens on students' access to certain resources, but at the same time, you don't take financial situation into account. Can you talk about how those two things come out in an application and how the committee squares that particular circle?
Yeah, I just think these are sort of two different buckets. I mean, ultimately, we're looking for people who are achieving at a very high level. And when I say that, we're looking to access to resources, I look at that in terms of the different kinds of achievements that we value. We value achievements that are on your resume and the kind that you'd never put on your resume. Maybe you moved to this country and we're helping you were the only person in your family who spoke English, and you were helping to navigate all of the challenges of being a new American family, while also being the first person in your family to graduate from school, for instance, from college. Okay, those are incredible accomplishments. We value them. Probably you didn't put those on your resume. We're okay with that. We're going to look deeply. At the same rate, we're not basing our decision on who to give the fellowship to or who to interview on how much need you have. We're just basing our assessment of your achievement based on a really holistic, well-rounded picture of who you are. But in terms of ultimately who we're choosing to fund, it's going to be a variety of people, and we'll be picking people who have all different kinds of successes and different kinds of achievements. Some will be the kind I just mentioned. Some will be incredible scientific discoveries. Some will be starting a policy organization that's had a really great track record in its first couple of years. I mean, there's lots of different ways. And so it's really that accomplishment that we're going to be using, but we're going to look very broadly at what that accomplishment looks like. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Carmen,
Please,
just to jump on that, I mean, I think also with graduate school being so expensive, I think, one thing to just think about on that front is like financial need for graduate school actually is pretty equalizing for most people. And we also have, a lot of applicants. And so financial need, even if that was something that we were looking at, would not whittle us down to 30 people. So that, I mean, I think just on the flip side, it's actually not that helpful, when you're looking at a 30-person fellowship, it's not going to get you very far in the selection process. But I mean, that is not something we take into account no matter what.
Understood. With the last bit of time we have, I'm wondering if either of you or both of you could share examples of ways that applicants have demonstrated their creativity, their originality, their initiative, and their citizenship that you think that would be good examples our advisors could bring to students as they tell their stories?
A good question.
Can I let you do that one, Nika?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I mean, I think the way that I would that I would talk to students about that. I mean, first on the creativity front, we're not looking for people who are artistic necessarily. We do have artists, but we're really looking for people who are just creative thinkers within their field. And so, any examples that folks can show of how, somebody might have been creative would be great. And, I think that is a hard word to break down. But I think we also say like folks who take initiative, take risk. So, one thing we've seen recently is that certainly there were a lot of our fellows who suffered, a lot during COVID. But I will say that we also saw immense creativity during that period, especially from a lot of students. And there was no rule book for COVID, and yet people did incredible things, even against huge obstacles. So what are some ways that students may have creatively worked on the things that they wanted to work on, or thought about ways to help people during that time? And that's a great way to think about citizenship, and also just taking risks and being innovative. And working in a very ambiguous space. So that, of course, again, many people didn't have any ability to do anything during that time, and certainly, don't have those examples. But I think that is one area where you can look. We have Kirthana, who's our 2024 fellow, who's doing her MPP. She was, a teacher, and then she went into the central administration for DC public schools, and she was working on the COVID response. So just a great example of somebody who's, clearly working way over the hours that are required of them, and doing it because they're passionate about the mission. I think when you're dealing with students who are in public affairs, they're often very on the nose with citizenship and our ideas of citizenship, but they don't have to be so focused on this direct giving back. It could be broader. Craig, do you have something that's come to mind?
I don't know why I always find that this question stumps me every time, and I think it's simply that there are so many amazing people in my head that I have a hard time. It's like I should prepare for this question beforehand. I don't have any. I'm not going to answer because it's mind-boggling, all of the amazing accomplishments that people have leading into this. Let me instead redirect you just a tiny bit. We have all of the bios up of our 30 new fellows. Yes, they're very intimidating. That's what we do. We create really amazing bios, but they are amazing people. And I think that if you go back just 2 years, and look for some of the people who are more aligned with the set of interests that you all work on with students, you can start to read a little bit about the types of people who had these, what kinds of accomplishments led us to select them. And then, I really like that in conjunction with Instagram, which Nika's already pointed out, but we allow fellows to tell their own stories there. And that's where they, I shouldn't say we allow them to tell their own stories in their bios too. They write their own bios, but I'm just saying they tend to be less scripted kinds of opportunities on Instagram, where people talk about their lives and some of the obstacles and challenges, as well as some of the more fortuitous opportunities that don't show up in a bio. So check out the fellows as they write their little stories. They get a week to take over Instagram, and it's another great place to learn about those accomplishments that people will share.
And sorry, just to interrupt, but I do want to say, Craig pointed this out, but we really value those accomplishments that are like the first in your family to graduate from high school, the first in your family to graduate from college, the first in your family to go to graduate school. And I think reminding students that those are only accomplishments if you consider them accomplishments, right? So or going to whatever university you go to, you can be really proud of your university and say it's an accomplishment to go there, or you can think, well, everyone is, I'm swimming in people that go to this university, so why is this an accomplishment? Well, we don't know your university that well, and we don't know your story. So the student gets to tell us what their accomplishments are. If, helping their parents with their taxes, teaching their younger sibling English, helping their grandmother manage their health, if those are accomplishments to them, then they can tell us those accomplishments. And those to us are great examples of ways that, we've seen many fellows be creative and thoughtful and good citizens of their homes, of their communities. So, it's also, I just appreciate when advisors can help reframe accomplishments for students in ways that you don't have to come up with anything new on your resume. You just have to share a little bit more about those things that, sometimes other organizations don't consider to be accomplishments.
I love that celebration of all of the ways that students contribute to their communities and their families and to all of our space. And I want to stress what Craig said, which is your students miss 100% of the shots they don't take. And so thinking with students about that richness they can contribute, make them great candidates for the PD Soros Fellowship. So thank you, Nika. Thank you, Craig, for all of your wisdom and for sharing this opportunity that our advisors are familiar with and need a good reminder and introducing it to others. To our advisors, we hope you'll join us. Coming up, we have a fellowship webinar on the Fulbright program, one later on the Pickering, Wrangell, Payne, Foreign Affairs, Fellowship and other things within that diplomatic fellowship community. And then later on, we'll have one on the Boren Awards. So lots of ways for your students to gain experience and opportunities, as well as funding for graduate school. So thank you to our speakers, and thank you to our advisors, and thank you to Brittany for making this event possible. We can stop recording, and we hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. We are so happy to be here. Thank you.